All right, guys, welcome to the video. Today we're going to actually go over rage, and the title seems a little clickbaity. I guess it is, but it's actually not. I'm literally going to show testing where 10% attack token on one side outperformed the other side, where they were gaining an extra 20 rage per turn, where essentially they were firing their active skill a second faster than the opponent every round, right? We're going to tie into and then how do you measure how good is a horn, some of the stuff that's affecting people's views on this, and then just kind of making an interesting discussion. There's still a lot of loose ends, right? So I don't want, I can't even present something and be super confident in, but like at least I want to present stuff that breaks people out of this dogma that you have to fire an active skill first, and that's actually the only way to go to get the biggest advantage, right? So we'll talk about some of the challenges of measuring rage, some of the concepts I would like to present in this video, show actual testing results like reports, videos, all that stuff, and then draw some conclusions. And then you can see here, right? You can see how you're firing 1 second faster, and then the next skill cycle you're firing 2 seconds faster, right? All right. So first, let's actually talk about the challenges of measuring rage. For the most part, the biggest challenge is that rage is a component of time, right? Besides something one-off like destructive, where you could essentially burn like 100 rage to do more damage. Rage actually just makes you fire your active skill faster, right? Now the challenge with rage is there isn't like a one-to-one conversion even to time, right? So it's not like 1 rage equals 0.1 seconds, because sometimes you can actually gain 50 rage and it doesn't affect your active skill at all. You're firing it at the same turn anyways. Sometimes you could gain 10 rage per turn for 5 turns, and then you're actually firing it like a second faster, right? So it doesn't necessarily always even translate over to the time component. It depends on a couple other factors, right? Just whether you get lucky, and then like how it interacts with some of the other RNG stuff that goes on, where there's a rage cap or not, all that stuff. But two, there's just way too many scenarios, right? So for the most part, when we're talking about rage, we like to talk about it like it's a dueling context. But what about the shorter duration engagements, right? Where you're engaging like 9 seconds or less and you're not firing an active skill. In that case, anything is better than a horn, because you could do a greatest glory, you could do a ring, you could do like a vengeance, right? They're all actually at least adding to the output. Whereas the horn is just not going to be doing anything until you fire your active skill, right? So it's important to keep in mind when we're talking about rage, you want to think overall and not just dueling, which is one of the anchoring effects that's on people, where we tend to think about all combat through the context of dueling. And then third and finally, there's just no real reliable way to test rage, because, for example, the accessories are all RNG, right? So you can't consistently predict it. If I actually want to go into different like trees to start picking like burning rage, something, I guess I could do that. Actually, probably could have done that, but at this point, I found another way to test it, which is actually Wick Gaming's formula. All right, so if you guys don't know Wick Gaming, he's long retired now, but in my opinion, the most influential ROK YouTuber, just because he literally figured out the damage formula, so we know how attack, defense, and health interact with each other, right? He also figured out that there's a rage cap, so that you just can't go above 220 rage every turn, otherwise it's going to cap it. This thumbnail you see here is actually from one of his videos, like well over 3 years ago now. But this is actually a very influential video for me, so I'll kind of walk through what it's saying here, right? So you see 4 numbers here. The 86 is essentially how much rage you gain every time you do a basic attack, right? So every turn, you're going to do a basic attack, and then the opponent's going to do a counter attack back, right? And then they're actually going to do a basic attack, and then you're going to do a counter attack back, okay? A basic attack is 200 damage factor. A counter attack is roughly 200 damage factor, unless you have something that's like increasing your counter attack. So in total, usually every white damage you see is actually 400 damage factor, because essentially it's attack and a counter attack combined into one, right? So the basic attack is going to give you 86 rage. The counter attack is going to give you 16 rage, which is why when you're getting surrounded, your rage is going to go up through the roof, because every opponent that's hitting you with a basic attack, you're going to do a counter attack back to them, right? So you're going to gain an extra 16 rage. Never mind, your troop count is going to drop really quick, but the rage gain is going to be through the roof, right? The third and fourth number is a lot less talked about. It's essentially a catch-up mechanism. So that white number, if you're the basic attack and counter attack, if you're losing the basic attack, you're going to gain an extra 10 rage. If you're losing the counter attack against their basic attack, you're going to gain an extra 10 rage. for the most part, think they go together. So whoever's losing the white number is actually going to gain an extra 20 rage. And this formula has been around for 3 years, right? And when I first saw this, or when I first watched the video and saw the formula, the first thing I thought of was, okay, so essentially the 20 rage per turn is a catch-up mechanism, right? 20 rage per turn is 200 rage every 10 turns, or like at least 1 second faster every skill cycle, right? At least. And if Lilith is going to put in a catch-up mechanism where you could gain at least 1 second an advantage in the active skill every turn, it should be solid enough to keep things close, but not so broken that a March that's clearly a lot better than another March can't pull away, right? And we've seen duels where March just pulls away and it's not even close, right? And that catch-up mechanism is there, but it's good, but not so broken where a much better March can't pull away, right? And that's where it kind of first anchored this idea for me that firing an active skill before the opponent might not be as good as we think it is, right? Because if it was that good, why would Lilith put in a catch-up mechanism actually to allow that to happen for the March that's losing every single time, right? And that's where a lot of this idea came from. So we're also going to use this to actually do the testing, because if you can set up in a way where there's no RNG and one side is doing more damage, the other side is clearly losing the white damage, they're actually going to be gaining an extra 20 rage per turn every time, or launching an active skill faster, at least 1 second faster every round. And then you can start doing some cool testing with that to see what happens, right? So that's actually what we decided to do, or what I decided to do, and then get some friends to help me out. Now, before we start, let's talk about some concepts. Okay, so the first idea is anchoring. All right, anchoring, here's a great little description. Lilith does it to you, right? If there's a mug and it's going for $300, you're gonna be like, that's ridiculous, it's super expensive. But if the mug came with like $1,000 price tag, and then you mark it down to $300 because it's 70% off, all of a sudden, wow, it's free money, right? So it's almost like if you could get if you could get 4 legendary chests for $100, that's a normal price, right? But if you could get 7 legendary chests for $100, oh my God, it's free money, even though you still paid $100 for 7, game legendary chests, right? That's how anchoring works. All right, so when I first started this game, there were 3 big dogma or anchoring effects that I noticed. The first one was that when you're doing a march, you want the damage taken debuff to actually go first, right? So a KVK1 march is Bjorn primary, Sun Tzu secondary, and the idea is that Bjorn's going to make someone take more skill damage, and then Sun Tzu's going to come in and actually have that damage amplified, right? Makes sense. In reality, it doesn't really work that way. And I think for the most part, the community has caught on. You actually want the more valuable active skill to go first, just because not only are you going to lower the opponent's troop count by more if you have the more valuable one go first, but also you don't always fire the second active skill. And then from a trade and damage output standpoint, having Sun Tzu go before Bjorn is going to be better, right? Same thing with like Boudica and ZO, right? ZO Boudica works better than Boudica ZO. Same thing with like LC and Alex, right? Like I actually first tried running Alex primary, LC secondary. It was very mid, right? Once I actually flipped to LC primary, Alex secondary, in my opinion, that's the best march in the game, right? So even the order matters a lot. There's obviously other factors, right? So I'm simplifying it. So that dogma or that anchoring effects has largely been dispelled. This next one actually is very, very strong still, right? And it's the idea that the whole goal, or one of the most valuable things you can do, is to fire your first active skill before the opponent, right? Because if you could get your first active skill off, you could drop the opponent's troop count by enough where then you'll get a significant advantage. And then that's actually like what will lead you most likely to win, right? Now, kind of hidden in that assumption is that white damage doesn't matter, right? Because if you're just assuming firing off the active skill first is the best, right? Then like you're not taking into account like the 8 or 9 turns, the white damage that actually also has to happen before you can fire your first active skill, right? And not all white damage is the same, right? Some people are actually, like some commanders are actually dealing more than the others, or a lot more than the others, right? Well, what about instant proc, right? Because if the first skill cycle is so important, right? What about something like an instant proc where you can actually fire it? You have the chance to fire it even faster before a really fast first active skill. wouldn't that be even more important? But like we almost don't relate to it that way. The dogma is you want the first active skill to go off first. That's why you want Hua, because he's so great in the first 15 seconds. He's going to get the active skill off first. W, right? Third one, and I want you to kind of think like how you view combat, right? It's in the context of duels, right? So even now you'll still see when a commander comes out, we'll do the commander pairing testing, we'll do the battle simulator, and it's just like, oh, with this pairing versus this pairing, there's this many 7 wounds left. Wow, this is a game-breaking pairing, right? Whereas like you actually rarely get into fights where it's just going to be duels, right? There's usually going to be a lot of like push pull. There's going to be shorter duration engagements, like not even quite cheeseburgering. If you're, for example, you actually sad face another march and no one's targeting you, you're going to drop combat. So whatever rage you built up is going to go away, right? Duels are not actually the most reflective of what open fielding is like, but it's the way we actually relate to open fielding the most. And duels are actually the perfect scenario for rage, right? So duels, think like rally garrison, because you can't exit combat, you can't drop combat, right? As soon as you fire an active skill, the rejuvenate everything is going to be triggering to the next one and the next one and the next one. You actually have the shortest amount of time between active skills, right? The shortest amount of times, not the shortest amount of turns. Whereas like think in the open field, if you're kind of pulling and pushing, it could still be like 8 turns to fire an active skill, but it could have taken like 13 or 14 seconds, right? And the longer it takes, then firing an active skill 1 second faster actually has less value, right? Like if there's 2 seconds and you're firing the active skill 1 second faster, it's super valuable, right? If there's 99 seconds or 100 seconds and you're firing an active skill 1 second faster at 99 seconds, it's way less valuable, right? That's kind of the idea. And then the third and finally, it's the idea of overraging. I've heard the argument before that, well, what's the big deal if you overrage, right? It's not like it's a big deal. You don't hurt yourself. It's that if you overrage and you pick some mechanism, right? So you pick some skill in a talent tree, or you picked an accessory where you're essentially wasting like part or all of that skill or that accessory, even an X percentage of time, there's an opportunity cost. Like what are you actually missing out on to pick that, right? So in the talent tree, it could be like 1% health or something, right? In an accessory, it could be like you decided to pick a drum as opposed to say like a greatest glory, where like, every time you're guaranteed to actually do 5% more on your white damage. And if you're a smite commander, you're actually doing 5% more on your smite, on your active skill for your smite damage, right? So it's not so much that overraging is bad. It's that there's always an opportunity cost if you are overraging. And then if you can pick something where that value is worth more than the rage that you're not getting anyways from overraging, then you want to switch to that other thing, right? Let's actually go to the video. The big thing here is just to notice that it's 2 Osmonds that have the exact same stats. So there's no RNG there. Any report I set up with Osmond, I only need to do it once. I could do it 10 times. It's going to be literally the same report all 10 times, okay? The reason why I picked them is because 1, there's no RNG. There's only 2 skills that really affect the open field, right? There's the active skill, 1100 damage factor with the expertise, and then there's the additional 400 damage factor. I kind of wish that it was just 1 active skill for 1500, but this is kind of just the best we could do, right? And the report here is just to show the troop buffs. So this is actually one where I put a 5% attack on my Osmond versus Jane Z's Osmond, which is why there's a difference. But the testing video you just saw was 5%. The next one I'm going to show you 10%. It looked very similar to the 5%. Big thing to notice though is that 2 similar Osmonds, one has a 10% attack token. So the 10% attack token's on the right. The one on the left is going to fire the active skill first by a second, right? And then I'm going to fire, so that's a 1 second advantage. The next time he's actually going to have a 2 second advantage, right? So he's going to fire the active skill now, right? And then there's 1, 2, and then I'm going to fire the active skill. And then the last one before he sad faces is actually going to be a 3 second advantage. So boom, he fires the active skill, 1, 2, 3, and then he's going to fire the I'm going to fire the active skill back, and eventually sad faces, right? So every skill cycle, I have a 10% attack token advantage. He actually has a 20 rage per second rage gain advantage, and that's a catch-up mechanism, but I end up winning, right? So There's a lot of things you could say about this because, oh, well, when stats, there's more stats and like the attack actually matters less, which is true, which is why instead of looking at just attack, I think it's more effective to calculate the attack, the white damage as a percentage of like how much more white damage you're dealing relative to someone else, because that means you're dealing that much more white damage, which means, you know, you're dealing that percentage more skill damage, because skill damage is just a multiple of the white damage, right? So you can see here, this report, right? I actually had a 5% attack token and I lost, right? So the first video I showed you, it was just stat face at the same time. It's actually kind of weird that you could put a 5% attack token on a March and it actually ends up losing a duel because of Lilith's catch-up mechanism. That actually is what happened here, all right? You can see the first turn, I fired 1 second faster. Second turn, it was 2 seconds faster. The third skill cycle was 3 seconds faster. And then the fight actually ended on turn 42. All right. Big thing here I want you guys to notice is after the first 9 turns, Jinzi took 2,000 damage. And I took he lost 2,000 troops and I lost 1,954 troops. Right. So if you want to calculate that as a percentage, I actually did 2.35% more damage than Jinzi or the opponent. Okay, so never mind the attack token, right? But like just 2.35% attack, right? That was not that big of an advantage, but that's the advantage I had after the first 9 turns. On 10 turn, I got hit with the active skill. Turn 11, I got hit by the additional damage of the active skill, but I also hit Jinzi with the active skill on turn 11. And then turn 12 for him was just a normal basic attack, counter attack. For me, I actually did the additional damage, right? After the 12 turns, if you calculate the number of troops, Jinzi actually fired his active skill a second before me and then hit me with the additional damage a second before me, right? But even with a 5% attack token, I actually came out ahead, right? 3,300 to 3,282, or it's a 0.54% advantage. Obviously, eventually the 5% attack token ended up losing, but it wasn't actually until turn 20 where I was actually consistently losing the troop count, and it actually wasn't even until turn 30 out of 42 where he started winning the white damage, right? So big takeaway from here is that essentially a 5% attack token, which translated to about like 2.35% damage advantage, wasn't enough to actually overcome the catch-up effect of 20 extra rage per second, right? The next one is actually upping it to 10% attack, right? So Jinzi is still going to gain an extra 20 rage per second. I'm going to gain 10% attack. And just caveat this, there is like a few turns where if I'm losing the white damage trade, I'm actually gaining more rage than Jinzi. But as you can see overall, right, 1 second advantage for the active skill, 2 second advantage, 3 second advantage, and then the turn was over. There's some like rage stuff, but it didn't really affect the outcome that much as far as active skills goes, okay? Same thing for the 10% attack, right? First active skill, 1 second advantage for him. Second active skill, 2 second advantage for him. Third active skill, 3. Fourth active skill, 4. And I think this one ended on turn 45. And you can see, so essentially, he actually had a 1 second advantage every turn, but ended up losing to a 10% attack token. Big thing to notice here, with a 10% attack token, after the first 9 rounds, I was dealing 4.9% more damage, right? 2,046 and 1950, so not quite 5%. And then after turn 10, 11, and 12, right, after he finished his active skill, and then I finished my active skill, I still actually came out on top with a 3.1% advantage to damage, right? So there's a lot of different things that we could test, right? Like, for example, one of the things you can argue is that, well, okay, that's only a 1,500 damage factor active skill. What if it was 3,000, right? Then firing the active skill first would be a lot bigger advantage, right? Which is true, because if you fire a bigger active skill first, you're going to lower my troop count by more. But also another thing to think about is an active skill, a bigger active skill is actually going to amplify a damage differential bigger, right? Because like if someone is doing 100 damage factor and I had a 5% different advantage, right? That advantage in damage is only going to be 5% of 100, right? Whereas if it's a 3,000 damage factor active skill, a 5% advantage is actually going to be 5% of 3,000. It'll be a lot bigger. So yes, you're going to take a bigger hit first, but also you're going to be doing more damage. Didn't actually set that up, so I don't know, right? The other one is people will make an argument is, okay, well, active skill isn't just a big damage. Right? A lot of times there's some really good buffs or debuffs, right? So for example, ZL, when you hit someone with an active skill, they're going to deal, I think like 15% less damage. That's really, really good, right? And how do you calculate that? I actually don't know, right? All I'm showing here is that the whole idea where if you fire an active skill first, even if it's only even if you only are dealing a 2.35% damage advantage, and they fire an active skill a second before you, after you fire your active skill, you're still going to come out on top, right? That's just the whole point. And if it does anything, I just wanted to kind of shake loose this dogma a little that firing the active skill first is everything, right? There's actually an opportunity cost. At a certain point, doing more damage is going to be more valuable than firing the active skill a second faster. Kind of the thing we would like to explore here is what that number is, and like when does it become worth it to actually choose more damage over more rage. Okay, now the best you can do right now out of one accessory is a crit horn, right? So a horn is 50 rage, 30% chance every turn, right? So 30% times 50 rage. It's going to come out to 15 rage per second, right? Or 10 turns is going to be 150 rage per second on average. There's RNG there, right? So sometimes it can move, but like if you do enough turns, that's going to be the average. So that's actually significantly less than this 20 rage per turn. If you have a crit horn, right now it goes from 50 to 65 times 30, right? It actually comes out to 19.5 rage per turn on average. It's still actually less than the 20, but it's a lot closer, right? So the number I'm showing you here is one, the perfect scenario for rage, which is a duel. Two, actually better than even a crit horn. And then you can make a strong case here that if you could do 5% more damage than the opponent, it's actually better than 20 rage per second, right? Like at least you could make a strong enough case. And that's just kind of the point I wanted to make, right? So in conclusion, what do I want people to get out of this? First of all, there's still a lot more, right? If people, I wish people would do more testing like this with different scenarios, right? One thing I thought of even making this video was, okay, instead of doing it using the Wick Gaming's like formula, right? What if I just made it where I just pick the talent tree all the same, and then one has like burning rage, the other doesn't, and we just kind of calculate the difference for that, right? But the problem there is this catch-up mechanism is actually going to come into play regardless, so you can't really avoid it, right? So I actually don't know. If you guys have some creative ways to do some testing, that'll be awesome. But I want you guys to get that white damage matters, okay? Like the white damage and then the subsequent skill damage or spine damage. You can actually fire a second slower and end up on top with a 5% advantage, right? That's just like a big takeaway. If you are going to pick something, figure out the opportunity costs, right? So if you're going to pick rage instead of 5% more damage, that's the opportunity cost. You're choosing between the two. If you're going to pick a point on the talent tree to make the opponent lose 50 rage, well, what are you losing, right? What 3 points are you losing to actually do that? Right. So it's not arguing whether that's good or not. It's that, is it better than the thing that you're choosing over it? That will help you make a lot more informed decision. And third, kind of what I'm presenting here, right? If in a perfect scenario, dueling, there's no chance of dropping rage, no chance of over-raging, and the 10% attack token can at least come out on top. I'm pretty comfortable essentially picking stuff where I think like 5% damage is going to be better than like a horn for me, right? So there's just certain marches that don't need rage. This is overrated. Like ZL does not need a horn, right? But things like Greatest Glory for combo and Smite Commander, that's just essentially a 5% all damage, right? We're going to pick that. Ring, it does 10% to trigger 50% damage. It's 2 seconds, but there's a 5-second cooldown. The math actually gets really complicated for that, but my gut feeling is that it's actually also worth it. The controversial one is going to be the dagger, right? And I'm not going to show the math on this one. I might actually literally just make a dagger video on the next one, because I'm seeing some blasphemous things about the dagger, right? And let me just kind of give you guys the numbers, okay? So on the screen on the right here, you can see this is max tech here's the equipment, here's the armament for one of my marches, and here's the buffs it has, okay? If you plug in that number into this formula, and this formula is accurate up to 10,000, there is a modifier that Wit Gaming couldn't figure it out, but in my opinion, it at least gives you a range of like what you're dealing with. If you put a 15% health debuff on this infantry march, they're going to take about 8.7% more damage. If you put a 10% health debuff on this infantry march, because it's going to take about a 5.5% more damage. And then a 5% health debuff is about 2.7%. Right, so 8.7, 5.5, and then 2.7% for 15, 10, and 5. Okay, assuming that number is correct, to me, it's like a no-brainer. One dagger is not that good. It's actually not even as good as a horn. But 2 daggers, I would take over 2 greatest glories, 2 rings, 2 horns, any day of the week. Because, as we mentioned before, right, a dagger, when you're putting a debuff on an opponent, you're not just benefiting your march, you're benefiting every march that's hitting it. So it's actually, for example, like if I'm hitting this infantry march with a 15% health debuff and it's taking 8.7% more damage, every single march, let's just say I'm using 6 marches, is actually doing 8.7% more damage to that march if it ramps all the way up, right? If it is actually even just that 2.7%, based on what I showed earlier in the first table, right, where 2.35% actually had an advantage even after the skill cycle, after the first skill cycle at 2.35%, like it's still worth it to me, right? So like there's a lot of scenarios where I can make a really strong case where the dagger is worth it. Not only is it worth it, it's actually the best, still the best accessory in the game if you have at least 2 of them. Right, but right now, I think we're severely undervaluing the dagger. And like, if your argument is that, oh, well, it's because there's a lot more health now. Well, you have to figure out with a lot more health, how does that change the math, right? Because if you can't actually come up with a math, then we don't have any place to base it off of, right? You're not calculating rage to damage taken. You're just calculating, oh, well, it's not as valuable now, so rage is more valuable. Like, it's not a one-to-one comparison. Okay, so I haven't decided yet if I'm actually going to make a video on the dagger, just because I think it's still the best accessory in the game if you have 2. But right now, I feel like the community as a whole is kind of underrating it. All right, so if you watched all the way to the end, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the video. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.